Hello, all you fabulous biology students. Today we're going to talk about the circulatory system. And the circulatory system I like to refer to as the United States Postal Service for cells. Here is an overview of the entire system. Its goal is the transport of materials to and from cells. So from the outside world to cells and from cells back to the outside world. And since it's a transport system, it needs an energy source. And that energy source is the heart, which is a pressure pump that moves liquid through the circulatory system by pressure. And in humans, as in all mammals, the circulatory system is a closed system. And what we mean by that is all the blood is contained within specialized tubes called blood vessels. That's not the case for other organisms, such as insects, where there are no closed vessels in which blood flows. The quote-unquote blood in insects just flows throughout the entire inside of the body. The circulatory system branches as it travels away from the heart into ever smaller branches until eventually it gets to what's called a bed of very small vessels known as capillaries, and that's where material exchange occurs in these capillaries. On the way back to the heart, the smaller branches dump into progressively larger blood vessels until you get to two really large ones that dump into the heart, as we'll explain in a few minutes. Most cells in the body are adjacent to a capillary, or at least very close. They're not very far from these capillaries. Materials diffuse into and out of the circulatory system. In other words, that's how they move. It's by diffusion. And they move down their concentration gradients. So that's important to remember. And necessary materials are imported to the circulatory system only in the small intestine and the lungs. And wastes are exported out of the circulatory system only in two places, in the kidneys and the lungs. On this slide, we have the basic overview ideas of the circulatory system. If you can remember these things, it will be a lot easier for you to learn the details about the circulatory system. Here is a picture that gives a schematic overview of what the circulatory system looks like. Note that the pump is here. The capillary beds are represented by these net-like diagrams, and that blood flows away from the heart into the capillary beds, and then back from the capillary beds to the heart in each case. The different colors show where blood carries more oxygen, red, and less oxygen, the blue blood. So if you see it blue, it means the oxygen has been depleted from that blood. And if you see red, it's highly oxygenated blood. The diagram highlights two types of circulation that we find in the human body. Systemic circulation, shown here and here, which is where blood leaves the heart and goes out to the tissues of the body. And pulmonary circulation, which is circulation to the lungs, shown here and here, where blood leaves the heart, goes to the lungs, picks up oxygen, goes back to the heart, and then goes into the systemic circulation. So we can see that our hearts consist of two pumps. One side of the heart sends blood out to the cells of the body. The other side of the heart sends blood to the lungs. And it turns out it's the right side that sends it to the lungs and the left side that sends it to the rest of the body. The pressure supplied by the heart causes the blood to flow. Blood loses its pressure in the capillary beds, as well as its oxygen and as well as the building block molecules, for example. And when blood returns to the heart from the body, it is repressurized and then sent to the lungs. Now, blood also loses its pressure in the lung capillary beds, but gets its oxygen and dumps its CO2 there. So that's the whole idea of the pulmonary circulation, is to get rid of carbon dioxide and pick up oxygen. When it returns to the heart from the lungs, it is repressurized and sent to the body. Now let's talk about systemic blood flow. Arteries are defined as blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart. Veins are blood vessels that carry blood towards the heart. So that's the definition. You need to learn that. Arteries are much more muscular than veins, and that's because they have to withstand the pressure produced by the heart and also transmit that pressure down the arterial line. When pressurized blood flows into an artery, the vessel expands and then the muscular walls contract and force the blood onwards. And here is a picture of that. Here are arteries on the top and veins on the bottom, and you can see that they have the same 4 layers of tissue, but that in the artery, the layers are much thicker and the muscular layers are much thicker, and the elastic coating is much thicker. And that means that these are much stronger blood vessels. You should study this picture on your own time when you get a chance. It conveys a lot of information. But you don't need to know these separate parts of the coating. I'm not going to test you on that information. I just wanted you to see what the structure looked like. Veins are not as muscular as arteries because blood that flows through them is at such low pressure, because it's just gone through a capillary bed, that they don't require the musculature of arteries. And in addition, they have valves in them to prevent backflow of blood. And this is particularly important in the lower extremities, because you can imagine how much pressure you would need to return blood up from your feet all the way back to your heart. So every time blood gains a little altitude in your leg, it can't flow backwards because the valves prevent the backflow. Next, I want to talk about the capillary beds. Here we can see a picture of a capillary bed, and you can see that what's missing from this picture are the cells, which would be all embedded in this network of capillaries, but we've removed the cells to show you what the bed looks like. And every cell is close to a capillary. Capillaries have very thin walls, and this allows materials to easily diffuse across them. And the other thing I want you to see here is that the artery branches off into smaller arterioles, and each arteriole then can serve a capillary bed. But there is more to the whole story than this. Let's take a look. If you look in this diagram, what you will see is that each capillary has a sphincter, a little muscle that can contract and close it off or relax and open it up. In this upper diagram, they're all relaxed, and you can see the red blood, the oxygenated blood, is flowing into the capillary bed. Now, normally, each capillary bed has the sphincters contracted. In other words, the muscles are closed, blood doesn't flow into the capillary bed, and instead a little bit of blood flows through what's called the thoroughfare channel, the central blood vessel, and some of the oxygen diffuses out at a low level. That's why they show the blood being purple here, mixing in with the highly deoxygenated blood. So these cells are still getting a little bit of oxygen. And only when blood is needed in this capillary bed are these muscles relaxed, and then blood will flow through. And then when blood is not needed there, when there's not very high metabolism in those cells, the muscles will contract and there'll be low levels of oxygen diffusing to them from the thoroughfare channel. Only about 5 to 10% of the capillary beds in your body are open at any given time. If they all opened, you wouldn't have enough blood to fill them, and you would have massive blood pressure loss, and you'd be in trouble. Here's another picture of a capillary bed where it's trying to show you some of the cells within. And the interesting thing is the red blood cells, which we'll learn about later, are a type of cell in the blood. They flow through the capillaries single file. And the liquid portion of the blood is called plasma. And at the high pressure end, it actually can leave the blood and flow into the body and be part of the interstitial fluid, that fluid that bathes the cells. And then at the low pressure end, it can re-enter the capillary bed. So the body has a way of adding or taking away interstitial fluid and putting it back into the blood. It can also flow into the lymph system, which is a whole nother circulation system that you probably have never heard of, that is associated with the immune system, and we may learn more about that later. Here is a scanning electron micrograph of a capillary bed, and you can see here are the capillaries, here is an artery, here is an arteriole, and it kind of looks like really good pasta, doesn't it? Here are some important capillary beds that you should know and love. They're just key ones in the body. One, there's a large capillary bed in the small intestine. You probably could have figured that out. That is used to absorb the building block molecules. And those capillaries are in the individual villi and absorbing molecules that have been digested by the digestive system, and then they're going to carry them off towards the cells. But first, material absorbed in the small intestine is carried to a capillary bed in the liver, and the liver makes sure there's no toxins in your food. And by the way, this is the only example in the body where blood travels from one capillary bed to another capillary bed without first returning to the heart. There is a large capillary bed, obviously, in the lungs, and we can remember that the alveoli are surrounded by capillaries. You may remember that. If you don't, you may want to go back and look at that PowerPoint, and that's where gas exchange takes place. And the nephrons in the kidney, which we're going to learn about in the next physiological system that we study, have a large capillary bed that is used to filter waste products from the blood and get rid of them from the body. And of course, there are capillary beds in every important tissue, in the brains, in muscles. Every tissue you can imagine has important capillary beds. But those four are particularly important for what we're studying in these first four physiological systems. Now I want to switch and think about the path of blood through the body. And this is something you absolutely have to be able to do. Blood goes from the heart to an artery, to an arteriole, to a capillary bed, to a venule, which is a small vein, to a vein, back to the heart again. We're also going to have to learn the path of blood through the heart, and that's more complex, but I've built in study aids into this presentation for you to be able to do that. In systemic circulation, two large veins, the superior and the inferior vena cava, and I'll show you those in a second, return deoxygenated blood to the heart, while one large artery, which is called the aorta, takes oxygenated blood away from the heart and off to the body. That's systemic circulation. In pulmonary circulation, deoxygenated blood leaves the heart in what's called the pulmonary artery. Remember, arteries take blood away from the heart, and they return blood to the heart in the pulmonary veins. So let's get a handle on circulation through the heart. Well, here's a picture of the heart. And the heart has four chambers. It has the right atrium and the right ventricle, and you're going to need to know those names. And it has the left atrium and the left ventricle. So the four chambers of the heart: right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. Blood from the right side goes to the lungs via the pulmonary artery, and here is the pulmonary artery. Now, at this point, I want to say you can see that this is blue and carrying deoxygenated blood. Sometimes people think arteries are defined by the oxygenation state of the blood they carry, but this is a case where you can see, no, this artery carries deoxygenated blood, and that's why our definition of an artery is it takes blood away from the heart. And that's important because that's high pressure blood, and therefore arteries have that more muscular structure. Blood returns to the lungs in the pulmonary veins, and they are coming in here, and you can see there are four pulmonary veins dumping their oxygenated blood into the left atrium. Note that there are two valves on each side of the heart. There is a valve right here between the right atrium and the right ventricle, and a valve right here between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery. You do not need to know the names of these valves. Similarly, on the left side, there is a valve between the left atrium and the left ventricle, and then another valve between the aorta, this large blood vessel that carries blood to the systemic circulation, and the left ventricle. And the point of valves is, can you guess it? Yes, you're correct, to prevent backflow of blood. We don't want blood backing up. When these ventricles squeeze, we don't want blood returning back into the atria. We want them going out, the arteries and veins of egress. This is a slide that I've set up for you. I've numbered the different parts, and you can practice this by starting at any one point and then simply clicking through this PowerPoint to study the name of the organ that blood is flowing through. So let's start with blood at number 11, the right atrium, which is right here. And then the blood is going to flow into number 1, the right ventricle, and from there into number 2, the pulmonary artery or the pulmonary trunk. Technically, each one of these is a pulmonary artery, and when they're joined, here's the pulmonary trunk. That'll become important in the pig dissection. You'll have to learn that. The pulmonary arteries then take blood to the pulmonary capillaries, and that's number 3. And then from there, there's no number here, but here is the pulmonary vein returning blood to number 4, the left atrium. From there, it goes to the left ventricle. From there, it goes to number 6, the aorta. And then from number 6, it goes out to the capillary beds in the upper body and head, number 7, and in the lower body, number 8. And then it returns through venules, veins, into 2 very large collecting veins. Number 9, the superior vena cava, which dumps into the right atrium. And number 10, the inferior vena cava, which dumps into the right atrium. And by the way, there is nothing inferior about number 10. It just occurs lower in the body, and that's why it's inferior in the sense that it's lower in the body. And then 11, we're back from where we started in the right atrium. So that is a task for you to do today. Start to study that. You can use this slide to help you do that, and you can find plenty of blank diagrams on the interwebs to let you study this. So now what I would like to do is just talk about a few other things that tend to confuse students. First of all, right and left. When we discuss the side of the heart or any other anatomical feature, we do so from the perspective of the organism itself, not from the perspective of the viewer. So the right side of the heart will be on the left side when you're viewing it. But if you're viewing my heart, my right side is over here, so my right side of my heart is over here, and my left side of my heart is over here, even though this looks to you to be on the right. So it's from my perspective, not yours. Now, the right side pressurizes blood for its trip to the lungs, and the left side pressurizes blood for its trip to the body. The first branch points off the aorta for the oxygenated blood leaving the heart are arteries that serve the heart and the brain as the 2 most important organs to keep alive in the body. So the first blood goes to the heart and the brain. We already talked about the valves, but there it is again, written down just so you can remember it. Here is another diagram that shows you the anatomy of the heart, the flow of blood through the heart, and the oxygenation state of the blood in the heart. So you can use this to study as well. And finally, here is another way to study, and you can go through once again and test yourself with a different diagram. And that's really useful because you never know the diagram you're going to get when you get to a testing situation. And in addition, when you see actual animals, it doesn't look like the diagram at all. So it's good to have a nice picture in your brain of what the theory is, and then you can figure it out when you're actually looking at something like a real human heart or a sheep heart or a pig heart. So hopefully all these duplicated diagrams are going to be helpful for you in learning this material. Well, that's it for today. I hope you now understand the goal of the circulatory system, how it works, the difference between systemic and pulmonary circulation, the path of blood generally through the body and then specifically through the heart. And tomorrow we'll go on to cover several different topics about the circulatory system, including things like the heartbeat cycle and the nature of blood itself. Until then, go out there, practice your biology, find questions you need to ask me, and bring them to class next time. See you tomorrow.